B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Tuesday, June 12th, 2018. The Singapore summit between America's comb-over and Little Rocket Man has produced some great optics, but not a lot of details about the plan to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula and lift American sanctions, not even any talk about a peace agreement to end the 70-year-old Korean War. But it was interesting to see how these two people who'd never met before could operate, and they only met for about 45 minutes, mano a mano. And we know that Trump wasn't prepared to talk about technical details or real complex substance. He was there to size up the Little Rocket Man, and he has declared that he's a good guy. Now, there's a lot of criticism of Trump. Let me say fundamentally that any effort that leads us toward a reduction in tensions and possible peace agreements, I favor, even if an odious guy like Trump will take credit for it. And he was full of self-congratulation at the news conference he gave, claiming that he'd been awake for 25 hours straight, but it didn't deter him from rambling on in his his classic style of syntax for about an hour. And he acknowledged that he did make a concession to North Korea. He has agreed to end the war games that we conduct with South Korea on an annual basis, sometimes several times a year. And that's something I think we should have coughed up before the Singapore meeting. So I don't really have a problem with that, but it's being viewed as an American concession. And we have hardliners on the left and right, who I'll cite for you in a moment, who are criticizing Trump for this first meeting. And my expectations were not that high. I was just hoping that he wouldn't stink up the joint like he did the G7 summit in Quebec last weekend. And it appears on that level my expectations were met. Now, he did try to make a little joke as they were sitting down for a working lunch. And Trump turned to a photographer who was capturing the scene and asked, are you getting a good picture so we look nice and handsome and thin and perfect? And apparently Kim was not amused when that was translated. We also don't know exactly how much Kim comprehends before the translator does his or her job. We're told he traveled in the West, he is fluent in English, but he, so far, has only spoken in Korean. Now, Trump, they're manhandling each other, touching their backs and being pleasant with these little elbow brushes. And Trump gave him a tour of the presidential limousine, the Beast, which, of course, was flown to Singapore for about a 4-mile trip from the airport to Sentosa Island. But that's how we roll. And the meeting, I think, as I say, was really good on optics. But afterward, Trump said that, this denuclearization, and he used the word scientifically 4 times. He said, scientifically, denuclearization takes a long time, and these processes, have to be shut down carefully, blah, blah, blah. And, of course, he's just repeating what somebody told him. He doesn't really have much of a command of the facts. He estimated the population of Seoul, South Korea, at almost triple the actual number. He said 28 million, and it is, to be accurate, a little bit less than 10 million. So Trump is being Trump. But it appears that there is a path forward here. The tensions have been reduced, and I think that in and of itself is a good thing. And despite my sharp criticism of Trump and so much of what he does, he backed into this in the wrong way with the threats against Little Rocket Man last year, and the fire and fury threats. But in this moment, he was largely able to control himself. There's a quote I'll get to in a minute here where he said that he may be wrong, but if so, he'll never admit it. And that is classic Trump. So a little commentary I turn to my friend, historian and journalist Gareth Porter, publishing at Consortium News. There's a link to it in the show file for you. U.S. public was misled on Trump-Kim summit. And he cites an expert with North Korea, the American Joel S. Witt, W-I-T, who worked on the North Korean issues from 93 to 95, 95 to 99, was coordinator for the Agreed Framework. And he cites an article that was published about 2 months ago that goes back to 2013 during the Obama administration. And he said that he and his counterparts from North Korea had a June 2013 statement by the National Defense Commission of North Korea where they stated emphatically that they'd been ordered by Kim Jong-un to indicate a readiness to negotiate with the United States on denuclearization. This is 2013. And he says, furthermore, the South Korean government in 2013 was hostile to diplomacy with the North. That was the female leader whose name I think is Roe, but I can't say explicitly. She's currently in prison in South Korea. And so what Gareth Porter considers here is that there has been a serious intention on the part of North Korea to go along this path and to trigger, to provoke some sort of negotiations by building up their nuclear arsenal and their capability to deliver a nuclear weapon via a long-distance missile and ICBM. And many people might reject that, saying, well, you can never trust the North Koreans, and I understand that. They are hard to trust. But here is the liberal human rights advocate in the New York Times, Nick Kristof. Headline, Trump was outfoxed in Singapore. And he immediately says, it sure looks like Trump was hoodwinked in Singapore. He made a huge concession, the suspension of those military exercises. That's on top of the broader concession of the meeting itself, security guarantees that he gave North Korea, and the legitimacy that the summit provides his counterpart, Kim Jong-un. Now, I've criticized that legitimacy, too. I believe that Trump made a big blunder in elevating the stature of Kim Jong-un in the first place. But that's done. Anyway, Kristof continues, Kim forced the American president through his nuclear and missile tests to accept North Korea as a nuclear equal, to provide security guarantees, and to cancel war games. And he says that Trump seems to have won astonishingly little in return. And I don't quite agree with that, because we've seen North Korea, at least for the benefit of video cameras, blowing up a nuclear development site, and as one of the verbal agreements that is not in the communique that both men signed, Trump says that Kim agreed to destroy a missile testing site. And that appears to be a major concession on the part of North Korea. Now, they could be playing games here. I freely admit that. But at this point, I'm willing to take this at face value and see where it might lead. So Kristof, who is slamming Trump from the political left, criticizes the vague terms of building a lasting and stable peace regime on the Korean Peninsula, whatever that means, he says sarcastically. And he closes by saying, whatever our politics, we should all want Trump to succeed in reducing tensions on the Korean Peninsula, and it's good to see that Trump now supports engagement rather than military options. There will be further negotiations. These may actually freeze plutonium production and destroy missiles, but at least in the first round, Trump seems to have been snookered. And I don't think that that is a viable conclusion at this moment. That may turn out to be true. But again, I think their expectations for this meeting were unrealistic. And Jennifer Rubin, whose column is called The Right Turn Blog at the Washington Post, oh boy, she comes out of the gate. The spectacle of the murderous dictator Kim Jong-un on equal footing with the President of the United States was enough to turn democracy lovers' stomachs. Trump's impulsive decision to have a summit and his insatiable need for attention provided Kim with a historic victory that no other U.S. president has handed to a North Korean leader. With not a single bomb dismantled or a single gram of fissile material shipped out of the country, Kim got more than he could have dreamed of, and all before the photographers departed. Now, I find this fascinating. And as I drove to the secret studio this morning, I listened to Rush Limbaugh. And it's curious the way he approached this. He was attacking Bill Maher, the HBO TV host who last Friday made a comment that he'd like to see a recession as a way of getting rid of Trump, because it would drive up his negatives and people would vote him out of office. And Rush, of course, couldn't help but reference himself. He was talking about how in 2009 he publicly said that he wanted Obama to fail. And so Rush was trying to paint all people on the left as hoping that Trump fails, and they're cheering for increased tensions and a possible conflict on the Korean Peninsula. And I don't believe that is true. But that's the way the right wing is trying to defend Trump and claim that this was a big old success. And it's really not. It is a moment in time. It is a relaxing of some of the icy tensions. But we will not know for some time whether this was a success or not. So we've talked a little bit about that concession. They signed a joint statement in which the U.S. Committed to providing guarantees of security that Mike Pompeo was touting. We don't know the details on that. Kim promised after signing the statement the world will see a major change. And it's interesting because the American team had provided a Donald Trump signature pen for Kim Jong-un to sign the communique, and one of his security people came in, wiped the pen down first. And then, just before he got ready to sign it, his sister handed him her own pen. Yeah, you got to worry about those CIA poison pens and cigars. I'm sure Kim has read up on some of the attempts to kill Castro decades ago. Then there is this weird video that Trump dropped. It's about 4.5 minutes long. Kind of looks like a movie trailer. It's blue sky propaganda, essentially offering black and white photos of the past and vivid color photos of happy people, condos on the beaches of North Korea. And, Trump did this as kind of the way he'd do a sales pitch for a Trump Tower in Uzbekistan or someplace like that. And the video was loaded with images that Kim Jong-un would respond to, including a basketball shot. I'm not sure if it was Dennis Rodman who was dunking, but this was an unusual tool and gesture on the part of the Trump team in, leaving a little gift for Kim to take home on an iPad. So, and Trump got an agreement that any remains of American soldiers killed in the Korean War will be repatriated. That is not, in my view, a difficult point to achieve. So the video, I think, is what will live on as kind of the iconic weirdness of this meeting, and we'll see where it all goes. Advancing his cruel concept of nationalism, Jeffrey Beauregard Jim Crow Sessions III, who plays Attorney General still in the Trump reality show, he used his authority, and he does have it, to revise the qualifications for asylum status granted to migrants who come to our borders and request it. And in this cruel move, he is eliminating people who claim that they fled their native countries because of domestic violence or gang violence. And the gang violence piece is particularly hard to swallow because Trump loves to rail about MS-13, and he seems ignorant of the facts. MS-13 is an American-grown street gang that has metastasized as we've responded to it by deporting members. And they have now taken up what is, unofficial control of the streets in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. And people have real fears. But Jeff Sessions says that that is not a good enough reason to request asylum in the United States. Quote, "The asylum statute does not provide redress for all misfortune. The mere fact that a country may have problems effectively policing certain crimes, like domestic violence or gang violence, or that certain populations are more likely to be victims of crime, cannot itself establish an asylum claim." And he blames Obama for expanding the definition of asylum, saying that back in 2009 there were only a handful of asylum requests and it has jumped, and that appears to be a fact. But this is so cruel. And the other factor that we're seeing, and I credit Vice News for a detailed report at their website today about these Egyptian-style mass trials that we're now conducting. Sessions has declared zero tolerance. You come to the border, you request asylum, we deny it, and then we convict you for crossing the border illegally and deport you. And instead of giving people individual trials, they are conducting these group trials of as many as 75 people at a time. And each person gets to make a brief statement about their guilt or innocence. They get 5 minutes with a public defender. It's all rigged. They know what the outcome is going to be. And this is not justice. This doesn't even come close. And here's some of the descriptions of the scene in this courtroom. When you enter the courtroom to observe the hearings, you immediately hit the wall of body odor that comes from a group of 75 people wearing the clothes they were apprehended in, sitting next to each other in row after row with barely an inch between them. The courtrooms are so packed there is little room to sit, and many of them are forced to stand. The judge on this particular day, Scott Hacker, gave each defendant a chance to add a statement prior to their sentencing. They all pleaded guilty because they're advised by their lawyers to do so in order to get the shortest sentence possible. In this case, the sentence is time served. That means the defendants are done with criminal court and they are placed in ICE custody and held only as long as it takes to deport them. And when they say, "Hey, Your Honor, what happened to my kids?" the judge has a rote answer. "I have no information regarding your child. Immigration doesn't call the court or me personally and tell me what happened to your child. If they did that, it wouldn't hurt my feelings, and I'd be happy to relay the information to you if I could. But they don't do that. So hopefully somebody will get in touch with you from that side of the government." Isn't that reassuring? Meanwhile, the new Italian prime minister, a right-winger, populist, anti-immigration guy, he's making a big stand just like Jeff Sessions. He is refusing to accept a ship with 629 migrants, among them more than 120 children. They have been at sea for days. They're running out of food. And fortunately, Spain has offered to accept them in the port of Valencia. But that's a 750-mile trip. They have to refuel, they don't have food, and the captain is not sure that he can actually make that journey safely. And so we are seeing nations led by Trumpism feeling free to reject the plight of people who desperately need help. The inhumanity of it all defies description. And south of our border, the 112th political candidate has been murdered just since September of last year. That is 8 months, 112 political candidates in Mexico have been shot and killed. The latest was Fernando Puron. He had just finished a debate with his opponent when a well-wisher asked him to take a selfie, and while they were taking that photo, a bearded gunman approached from behind and killed the candidate. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. Today I want to thank Andrew Bodo, who just renewed his annual subscription, the ever-generous Faith Peoples. She's got multiple subscriptions, as does Benny Alto. He's got one for every one of his pups and pooches up there in Oregon. And Jason Spitzer is also a longtime supporter who kicks in $5 every month. I thank each of you and invite others to join you. Come on over to peterbcollins.com, and all you got to do is click on menu, then click on Become a Subscriber. You land on the sign-up page. And in a moment, I'm going to tell you about today's fresh interview with Joe Hickman. If you take out a new annual subscription for $50, I have 2 or 3 copies of Joe's important book called The Burn Pits, and they will go to the first 3 people who take out a new annual subscription and give me a mailing address here in the continental U.S. And that interview I found very interesting. Joe Hickman opens up by commenting on new legislation that's before the Congress brought by Tulsi Gabbard, the congresswoman from Hawaii who is an Iraq War veteran. And this gives parity to the military victims of the burn pits, parity to those exposed to Agent Orange and Gulf War syndrome. And in this excerpt from our interview, Joe Hickman comments on how long it has taken to address the burn pit's toxic impact on our soldiers, just about as long as those other scandals.
The time frame is they're following the same. Almost everything is the same. This has been the first reported cases of burn pit exposure was in 2004, so it took them 14 years to get here. We've lost more soldiers, I would say. I mean, they don't keep records of it, but I know I'd estimate from what I've researched, we've probably lost 4,000 or 5,000 soldiers from their toxic exposure to burn pits, and maybe even more. There's just not a good enough record, but I would say at a minimum 4,000 to 5,000 people, and still hundreds of thousands are very ill. So they took their time on this. It's still sinful, but at least we're here now.
That's military whistleblower Joe Hickman. In addition to commenting on the burn pits legislation, Joe talks about how Vice President Joe Biden has now read his book and was touched by the section about Beau Biden, his son, who was exposed to burn pits and then died of cancer. Also, we talk about the grisly milestone, 12 years since the suicides that Joe Hickman was a witness to. He saw 3 men removed from the main camp at Guantanamo one night, and the next morning they all returned dead, and we were told that they had committed suicide. He exposed that in his book, Murder at Camp Delta, and he comments on that. I also got powerful comments from him on the case of Reality Winner, the latest whistleblower who's being prosecuted and who was exposed by the bungling of The Intercept and its reporter Matthew Cole. Cole also burned Hickman and his co-author John Kiriakou, and he also takes a swipe at James Risen and explains how Risen came to his door one night trying to get an interview, and things didn't go well. I think you'll find that very interesting. Also today, we're releasing a fresh interview at whowhatwhy.org. I produce podcasts for them on an occasional basis, and today it's an interview with Yasha Levine, who comments on the recent scandal at Google about the Maven project, artificial intelligence to guide drone warfare. And Yasha Levine details the history of Google's contracts with the Pentagon and asks why so many employees are suddenly becoming aware of Google's deep involvement with the military and security complexes.
Well, my general comment about this controversy is that it's very ahistorical. It ignores Google's long-standing relationships with the military-industrial complex and its more than a decade of contracting with the Pentagon, with the CIA, with intelligence agencies like the NSA. So this is people are hyper-focused on this one contract, on this one program to develop AI capability for drone visual recognition systems. But it ignores Google's history of being what is in essence a military contractor, a kind of a modern Lockheed Martin for the internet age. And this contracting goes back to almost the very beginnings of this company, to the early 2000s. The earliest contract that I could dig up went back to 2003 when Google sold its search technology. So it installed custom-made Google search boxes inside the NSA's data warehouses.
I think you'll find it interesting, and it's available to anyone at whowhatwhy.org today. In Maryland, lawyers for that state and the District of Columbia got a hearing in federal court about the accusations that Trump and his family are profiting on an unprecedented scale from foreign government interests using his Washington hotel. And we know that Ivanka got a few $1,000,000, her share of profits from the Washington Hotel. She and Jared took in a combined $80+ million last year. So this family is profiting from Trump's presidency. It violates, in my view, clearly, the emoluments clause of the Constitution. And District Judge Peter Mesite peppered lawyers for both sides of the arguments, had a particularly pointed exchange over Justice Department Brett Shumate's view that emoluments required a clear, provable quid pro quo, an exchange for an official action. We'll see how the judge rules on that case. In our neighboring state of Nevada, please don't say Nevada, you may know that houses of prostitution are legal except in the counties that contain Las Vegas and Reno. So it's mostly rural counties, 7 of them. And one of those brothels is owned by a guy named Dennis Hoff, and that pimp is now running for the state legislature because he wants to push back on referendums to ban brothels in 2 of the 7 counties in Nevada. And these are being brought by evangelical types who want to, in their view, clean up Nevada. And I view this as harmless adult behavior and the freedom of individuals to buy sex or to sell it. I know some people disagree, but that's my position. And finally today, after 35 years, an Air Force officer who disappeared in the 1980s, 1983, his name is William Howard Hughes, Jr., no relation to the billionaire weird guy, and he just dropped out of sight back in 1983. And last week, he was picked up and accused of having a false identity in a community here in Northern California. And he now faces charges of desertion. He managed to stay out of sight pretty effectively for a pretty long time. Thanks for listening today to my News and Comment podcast. It's absolutely free, and you're absolutely free to share it with anybody you'd like. You'll find it on YouTube, and I remain Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.